Dove Books on Tape presents Everybody Loves Oprah, her remarkable life story by Norman King. To experience Oprah Winfrey for the first time, you are aware immediately of a sense of almost pervasive human warmth, an enveloping hug of empathy, compassion, and trustworthiness. And only then are you able to focus on the smiling, welcoming, beautiful face, surrounded by that distinguishing halo of luxuriant black hair. It is the eyes that are overpowering. Eyes the size of residential swimming pools, as one admirer has put it. Behind the eyes, as you continue to gaze, you can see glimpses of an original intelligence that peeps through on occasion to reveal the presence of the remarkable woman within. And that, seen and engraved on the mind in a split second, is the phenomenon called Oprah Gayle Winfrey. But the first split-second glimpse never tells the full story of anyone. For this woman, who is passionately interested in dieting and in studying men, is also as passionately interested in rape victims and victims of child molestation, and even in members of racist groups pitted against all people of her own black race. Unpredictable. This is the key word for Oprah Winfrey, the Chicago talk show hostess who at the age of 30 arrived in Chicago to take over an ailing morning show, and since that moment has steered it quickly and assertively into the stratosphere, where it has outrated Phil Donahue, the acknowledged king of the talk show business. Who was this person who could take on the giant on his own turf and bring back his scalp within such a short time? Who was she? And how had she gotten where she was so quickly? And why did everybody seem to love Oprah so soon? Oprah Winfrey was born on February 1st, 1954, in a tiny southern town with a somewhat unlikely name of Kosciuszko, Mississippi. Upon further examination, however, the name, derived from a Polish war hero of the American Revolution named Thaddeus Kosciuszko, does not seem quite so unlikely. In those parts of the South, the word rebel, even today, has a heroic ring to it. And somehow Oprah grew up in that same tradition of rebellion, which she has never really given up. Her parents were as rebellious as Oprah proved to be, rebels against the social status quo in which they lived. At the time of their daughter's birth, they were unmarried and separated by some 250 miles, her mother in Kosciuszko and her father at Fort Rucker, where he was stationed in the armed services. Shortly after the birth of her daughter, the mother left town and headed for Milwaukee, Wisconsin, without her. In fact, Oprah herself attributes her conception to what she calls a one-day fling under an oak tree. She, the offspring that resulted, was as unexpected as the fling that produced her. Her father and mother, Oprah says, never repeated their union after that first time. Her father, 20 years old at her birth, was Vernon Winfrey, who later moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and became a barber, a grocer, an elected councilman, and a deacon in the Baptist church. Her mother, Vernita Lee, was 18 years old and a farm girl, ready any day to split Kosciuszko and go north, where there was more work and more money to be made. "I am not proud of what happened with Oprah's mother and me," Vernon Winfrey said many years later about the incident of Oprah's birth. "I tell people today that if something like that happens, the boy should help take care of the child." Vernon, however, did not. Stationed at Camp Rucker in the wilds of Alabama, he did not even know that Vernita was pregnant. He went back to the base after spending his leave at home in Kosciuszko, and in terms of Vernita at least, it was a case of out of sight, out of mind. It was a sister of Vernita's who suggested her daughter be named Orpah, a biblical name from the book of Ruth in the Old Testament. As any student of the Bible knows, Orpah was the sister-in-law of Ruth. When the two sons of Bethlehem-born Naomi died in Moab, what is now known as Jordan, Naomi called together their wives and bade them farewell. She was going to return to Bethlehem. She suggested that her daughters-in-law go their own way, that is, stay in Moab with their families. But the name of Orpah was not to be for this tiny baby born to Vernita Lee. Either the midwife who assisted at the birth at home or the record clerk mixed up the second and third letters of the name because Orpah became Oprah by the hand of fate, or whatever. By the time of Oprah's birth, Vernon Winfrey was long gone from Kosciuszko. It was in Alabama that he received a printed birth announcement in the mail from Vernita. There was a scrawled note for him in her handwriting, "Send clothes." And that was the laid-back way he received the news of his daughter's birth. Oprah's childhood from birth to the age of 17 was chaotic, to say the least. It was spent in 3 separate geographic regions of the United States under 3 disparate parental systems. These periods could be called life with grandmother, life with mother, and life with father. To make it even more chaotic, those 3 divisions were not neatly compartmented, but tended to overlap and blur into one another. Oprah never knew from one year to the next where she might be required to live or with whom. It was not the kind of environment that might contribute to a well-integrated, stable, and easygoing personality. It took courage and fortitude even to survive from one move to the next. Life with grandmother began shortly after Oprah was born, when her mother left Kosciuszko to go to Milwaukee. She had heard she could find work as a part-time maid there. The pay of $50 a week was much too high to pass up by staying in Kosciuszko. But there was no place there for a small baby. So it fell to Vernon Winfrey's mother, the sole inhabitant of a small pig farm on the outskirts of town, to take in Oprah. It was not a particularly easy life for Oprah, for Vernon's mother was a strict member of the Faith United Mississippi Baptist Church and put up with very little in the way of resistance to her orders. When Oprah was a child, the church formed a very comfortable shelter over her. She was expected to read and to know Scripture. She was expected to act in church pageants. And in addition, she was expected to recite on special occasions when invited. At the age of 3, in fact, she made her first public appearance, speaking at the Baptist Church in Kosciuszko. It was Easter time, and the theme of her talk was, "Jesus Rose on Easter Day." Later on that winter, she gave a Christmas talk. Probably because she shone so in church, Oprah began to be called the preacher by the other kids her own age. They would make fun of her, announcing her arrival with a sneered, "Here comes Miss Jesus," or something equally disagreeable. Oprah hated them all. She felt it was a horrible way to be treated, but she could do nothing about it. Oprah Gayle Winfrey was alienated at an early age, alienated, and made to feel different from the rest of her peers. A few of her neighbors understood her better than the rest. They knew what her intelligence and brightness and shrewdness really meant, and they began saying that the child is gifted. Vernon Winfrey's mother owned the farm and did everything there was to do to run it. She even made all Oprah's clothes herself, working laboriously with a needle, thread, and scissors. The house in which Oprah lived was an ancient and dilapidated structure. She slept with her grandmother in a huge feather bed that she will always remember. There was an outhouse in the back. There was a well down about 100 yards from the house. Oprah's primary chore was to go down there every morning and draw water for the day. Summer, winter, autumn, spring. She called her grandmother Mama because it was the natural thing to do, and also because she did not want to think about the fact that her real mother had gone to Milwaukee and left her behind. While it was first and foremost a pig farm, the place did boast 1 cow and a few chickens. Aside from the pigs and those other friends, though, Oprah was totally alone. When company did come to the farmhouse, and that was seldom, Oprah's grandmother would take over. I would be ordered to sit in the corner and keep my mouth shut, Oprah would have loved to talk with everybody she could, but it was just not allowed. Oprah remembers, "I never saw a movie, and maybe twice a year I got to see somebody's television, and that was it." Grandmother was a tough taskmistress in the area of reading, writing, and arithmetic, as well as in the area of church study. In self-defense almost, Oprah soon picked up the ability to read and write. One of Oprah's obsessive dreams was a most understandable and poignant one. She wished with all her heart she was white instead of black. "The reason I wanted to be white," Oprah explained, "was that I never saw little white kids get the whippings I got. You spill something, you get a whipping. You tell a story, whatever happens, no matter how small the indiscretion, you get a whipping." She was quick and sharp, but not too interested in applying her quickness and her smartness to studies or to scholarship or to that kind of thing just yet. She applied most of her wiles to making it easier for herself to cope with life as it was. When she started kindergarten, it all seemed just a bit childish to her when she finally became aware of what the curriculum consisted of. None of the other kids did much of anything except string beads and draw funny pictures with crayons. Oprah then made one of her earliest rebellious protests. She wrote a letter to the teacher informing her that she felt she didn't belong in kindergarten. Surprisingly enough, the teacher agreed. Oprah went back to the pigs and the chickens and the books. But she had made her point, and had made it in a most unconventional and unexpected way. Kids of that age just weren't supposed to write letters of protest. Oprah was different. Shortly after that, Oprah entered the first grade, and there she astounded everyone by the way she approached the subjects that came up. She seemed to know more than all the other kids put together. She was so good, in fact, that the school skipped her from first to third grade. A lot of her rapid advance had to do with that early grandmother-initiated farm-learned ability to read and talk. At the age of 6, Oprah was getting to be quite a handful for her grandmother to grapple with, and about this time a big change came into Oprah's life. With the little girl exerting herself more and more in rebellion against the world around her, Vernon Winfrey's mother sought help from Vernita Lee. The upshot of the call for help was that Oprah left Mississippi for the first time in her life and traveled to Milwaukee, where she was to live with her mother. Vernita was now making some money doing housework. Although Oprah did not know it, she had seen the last of Mississippi, at least as a place where she would live. It was a whole new ball game up north. And so began what for Oprah Winfrey could be called life with mother, a brief era, but a tempestuous and important one. It was rough. On the one hand, her mother worked hard to support her in Milwaukee. On the other hand, Oprah was beginning to shine as one of the chosen people of God, bright and aggressive and hard to manage. She became known as the Little Speaker, much as she had been known as the Preacher. She recited poems like Invictus at black social clubs and church teas, wherever her mother could get her to go. But in the home with Mother, life was hell on earth. "I felt like I was an outcast," Oprah recalled. "I don't know why my mother ever decided she wanted me with her in Milwaukee. She wasn't equipped to take care of me. I was just an extra burden on her." She and her mother were dirt poor. It was in Milwaukee, when Oprah was first living with her mother, that she began stealing money out of Vernita's handbag. "I wanted to have money like the other kids," Oprah said in recalling those dubious days of doing without. They were always saying, "Let's go to the pizza parlor, Opie. Let's get shakes, Opie." She always had plenty of names to contend with. She might be Oprah one day, Opie the next, or even Opal, Oopie, Ofra, Okra, Ofrey, Opera, or almost anything sounding like Oprah. Vernon Winfrey, Oprah's natural father, had left the armed forces in 1955 after serving his hitch. That was a year after Oprah's birth, and had settled down in Nashville. Straight out of the service, without penny one in his pocket, he had arrived in town and set about scrounging a living out of 2 jobs, one of which Vernon later called the worst job in Nashville. It was washing pots at one of the city hospitals. For that he was paid the princely sum of 75 cents an hour. The second job was a bit more palatable, almost prestigious in comparison. He was a janitor at Vanderbilt University. Soon he met the woman in his life. Her name was Zelma, and they were married. In 1962, when Oprah was 8 years old, she had become such a handful for her mother that Vernita leaped at the sudden and welcome opportunity to send her to her father and stepmother in Nashville. When Vernon and Zelma met Oprah, it was love at first sight. Although Oprah was somewhat subdued and not quite sure how things were going to work out in her new home, she did particularly like her 2 new parents right from the first. Zelma was, as Oprah explained, real tough, a very strong disciplinarian, and I owe a lot to her because it was like military school there. I had to do book reports at home as well as in school and learn so many vocabulary words a week. It was just like life with grandmother, only in this case, Oprah couldn't really get away with even as much as she had been able to with her grandmother. Unfortunately, it didn't really last all that long. Before things settled down, Oprah was uprooted once again, this time for a visit back to Milwaukee the following summer. When Vernita asked for Oprah, Vernon and Zelma agreed to the visit, of course. It was the right thing to do. But it was hard for them to part with a spirited little girl to whom they had become quite attached, even for the few summer months she would be away. I moved back to live with my mother when I was 9. The reason was that my mother said, "Come and live with me. I'm going to get married, and we're all going to be a real family." Vernita had been arranging to marry a Milwaukee man for years, but they had simply not yet worked it out. The man already had a son and a daughter. To Oprah, it was somewhat unnerving to be back in Milwaukee again, and once again in the zone of poverty that described her mother's life circle. Summer was soon over, and right on cue, Vernon arrived to take her back to Nashville for the opening of school. Vernita told him that she had changed her mind. She did not want Oprah to go back to Nashville. Her place was in Milwaukee with her mother and her new father. It was a difficult situation. Vernon and Zelma had recognized Oprah's need for discipline and hard work, and something of a home life to anchor it. He knew she was not getting it in Milwaukee, but there was nothing he could do short of taking her back by force, and it simply was not in his nature to try that. And so it was that what might have become her third life, life with father, did not begin in 1962. Oprah now was simply to live out a second part of life with mother back in Milwaukee, a continuation of her earlier stay there. In fact, it was a no-win situation. It never worked out, Oprah said. I wanted a daddy when I was in Milwaukee. I wanted a family like everybody else because I was going to this school where kids had mothers and fathers. I used to make up stories about my mother and my dad. I told the biggest lies about them because I wanted to be like everybody else. Now that she was a little bit older, she was starting to understand a great deal more about life. She was black in a world that was predominantly white. This was more obvious to her in Milwaukee than in Nashville. And she had little for herself. Much of what came to the family went to her new brother and sister. Oprah was the one who always got the short end of the stick. She began to feel her own alienation, not only from the mainstream, but from her natural father and mother. She started to act up in front of everybody, strike back at them. She ran away from home, periodically, and played tricks on anybody she could. I started acting out my need for attention, my need to be loved, as she analyzed it later. My mother didn't have the time. She worked every day as a maid. I was smart, and my mother, because she didn't have the time for me, I think tried to stifle it. The intelligence, that is, the smartness. Oprah was 9 years old when the tone was set for the serious misbehavior years that were to follow. It came about because of the cramped family conditions in which she lived. There was a bedroom for her mother and her new father, and there was a bedroom for her and her brother and sister. Oprah had a bed for herself, and her sister and brother had theirs. Her mother and father would invite relatives to stay overnight and even to babysit with Oprah and the brother and sister when Vernita was working late or out somewhere. Among the relatives was a 19-year-old male cousin, 10 years older than Oprah. Instead of going home, the cousin frequently stayed over at the apartment. There was only one bed, Oprah explained later, and I had to sleep with him. Can you imagine? I didn't know anything about sex that summer. One night, her cousin simply took advantage of her and raped her in bed. She was too naive, too petrified to know what was going on, too surprised to fend off this older cousin. She was left stunned and puzzled by what happened. The cousin knew exactly what to do. To keep her quiet about it, he took her out to visit the zoo and bribed her there with an ice cream cone. I didn't tell anybody about it because I thought I would be blamed for it, Oprah explained. Shortly after her encounter with her cousin, when Oprah was at a playground with a school friend, the conversation got around to the way babies were made. Oprah caught on right away, even if she was only 9, and concluded that her actions in bed with her cousin were baby-making ones. Now she had a good idea of what would happen to her. She got the idea that she was pregnant. The worst horror of rape by her cousin was the fact that Oprah was fated to worry all through the 5th grade that she would have a baby, maybe right in class. Now the already planted patterns of misbehavior proliferated. After all, what did she have to lose now? She knew what men wanted. She knew why they wanted it. She knew they would be good to her if she gave it to them. And so she lied. She stayed out later than her mother told her she could. She stole money from her mother's purse. She ran away from home to get dates with everything with pants on. In the next 5 years, she allowed herself repeatedly to be abused by other men. At least one of them was a close friend of her mother's. Another was an uncle of Oprah's. All of the men who abused her were trusted members of the family, either direct blood relations or close friends. Why did she allow these one-night affairs to continue? Oprah has discussed this problem many times in many different ways. I blamed myself, she said in one frank interview. I was always very needy, always in need of attention, and they just took advantage of that. Life in Milwaukee was not all abuse and degradation. By the time Oprah was 13, she was attending school in an affluent suburb of Milwaukee called Fox Point, some 25 miles from the center of Milwaukee. It had been a teacher at Lincoln Middle School, where Oprah was enrolled at the time, who had given her the first boost she had ever had out of her incipient delinquence. Mr. Gene Abrams used to see me reading in the cafeteria, Oprah said. He got me a scholarship to Nicollet High School. Nicollet was a prestigious high school located on the North Shore. As an experiment in integration in 1968, a handful of the brightest of the black students in the city were bussed out to Nicollet for their education. It was an eye-opener for Oprah. In fact, it opened her eyes to things that she did not know about and to things that changed her life forever. It was the first time that I was exposed to the fact that I was not like all the other kids, Oprah recalled. In 1968, it was real hip to know a black person, so I was very popular. The kids would all bring me back to their houses, pull out their Pearl Bailey albums, bring out their maid from the back and say, "Oprah, do you know Mabel?" They figured all blacks knew each other. It was real strange and real tough. Opening her eyes was not too good for Oprah's self-image. I realized I was poor then, and after seeing how the other half lived, I started having some real problems. I guess you could call me troubled, to put it mildly. She was, as she put it, very frustrated with the idea that she could not have what they had. Her envy, coupled with her own hostility over the abuse of her body by trusted members of her family, caused Oprah to intensify efforts to strike out at life around her and at the individuals who peopled it. One of the most irrational and imaginative cases of striking out indulged in by Oprah was what came to be called the affair of the butterfly bifocals. It started when Oprah's mother had Oprah's eyes tested and found that she was astigmatic. She was told she must wear prescription glasses, and they had to be bifocals. The pair that her mother purchased had butterfly rims on them. Oprah's idea was for her mother to get her a more fashionable pair of glasses, something stylish and trendy, so Oprah would not look like such a freak. But her mother shook her head. "No, I can't afford them." That was too much for Oprah. She brooded about it and plotted out a scenario that was, if nothing else, at the very least, ingenious. She cut school the next morning while her mother was out working and threw her butterfly bifocals on the floor. Then she tramped on them until they were broken into a million pieces. She pulled down the curtains, knocked over the lamp, and then telephoned the police. "We've been robbed," she sobbed. It was all very dramatic. She lay down on the floor and waited for the police to arrive. When they came in, right on schedule, they took a look around and began to sense a scenario that had been slightly orchestrated. To them, it just did not look right. Meanwhile, Oprah was reviving from her feigned lapse into unconsciousness. Questioning her, the police began asking all the wrong questions, wrong from Oprah's point of view. To escape ignominy, she sank down into amnesia. "Of course," she said later, "I had seen this on Marcus Welby, M.D., about someone having amnesia. This was the story. Someone broke in, hit me on the head, and knocked off my glasses." Plausible? Maybe. But the police did not buy it. After all, they watched television too. Nevertheless, she was sent to the hospital and, somewhat fearful, was examined there. "How do we find your mother?" she was asked. Oprah took that as a good reason to lose her memory once again. She went into a faint. And all that trouble to get a new pair of glasses. But there was more trouble to come. It came in the shape of Oprah's mother. The police, of course, had no trouble locating Vernita Lee. "I'm lying there in the hospital room," Oprah recalled. "They bring my mother in." The almost hysterical Vernita Lee arrived with the police. She was weeping uncontrollably. They then explained to her that there had been a robbery at the apartment, and that the toughs, whoever they were, had roughed up her daughter and left her on the floor. Oh, and the robbers had broken her eyeglasses. The tears in Vernita Lee's eyes abruptly dried up. "They broke her eyeglasses?" she asked in a suddenly harsh voice. The police nodded, and they explained that Oprah apparently had lost her memory as well as her glasses. "You don't know who I am?" Oprah's mother asked her, glaring at her. "No." Oprah could barely speak. "I'm going to count to 3 and see if your memory improves," her mother told her slowly. No sign from Oprah. 1. Nothing. 2. Oprah opened her eyes. "It's coming back to me now." Vernita glowered at her daughter, flexing her muscles. "You're my mother! You're my mother!" Oprah hollered. Anyway, she got the new glasses, along with a lot of sore spots on her body. Oprah always had big dreams, her mother recalled recently. She was always telling me she'd go to Europe and be famous. She felt it in her bones. Maybe she was headed in that general direction the next time she decided to run away. She walked downtown into Milwaukee. It was there that she quite fortuitously happened to be passing by when a limousine pulled up in front of a hotel, and a celebrity Oprah recognized stepped out of the car to enter the lobby. It was Aretha Franklin. Brash and pushy, Oprah strolled up to the singer and introduced herself. Trying to hold back the tears in her eyes, she began telling the singer a hugely melodramatic story about how she had just been abandoned by her parents and needed $100 to get home to Ohio. Aretha Franklin listened to the story with a straight face, and when Oprah paused for a breath between sobs, pulled out $100, no questions asked, and handed it over to Oprah. With the money in her bag, Oprah rushed over to one of the biggest hotels in Milwaukee, where she got a room and holed up in it all alone. Then she telephoned down and ordered room service food for 3 whole days until the money ran out. "I was so scared afterward," Oprah recalled. "I went over to my minister and confessed to him." She told him, "I am up the creek. You got to help me to get back to the house." It took some doing, but the minister pulled it off. Oprah's mother was not particularly elated over the incident and warned her daughter that there had better not be any more shenanigans like that or else. But she ran away from home again, leading her mother on a merry chase for several days until she was located and returned to the apartment. At that point, Vernita Lee knew that she would have to get in touch with Vernon Winfrey. She could not cope. It was decided that Oprah would go back to live in Nashville with her father and stepmother. So began life with father, this time for real. The Oprah Winfrey who came down from Milwaukee to Nashville in 1968 was almost nothing like the 9-year-old girl Vernon Winfrey had reluctantly surrendered to Vernita in 1963. She had completely grown up in most senses of the word. She was worldly, street-smart, unself-conscious, and dressed to the nines. The meeting in 1968 between Vernon and Oprah was not the most inspiring or optimistic one imaginable. Instantly, Vernon had his own idea about how Oprah was going to behave now that she was again under his control. And of course, Oprah now had her own ideas and her own pattern of misbehavior to pursue. The battle lines had been drawn. The war started immediately in small skirmishes and scouting encounters on both sides. When Oprah wore a dress that had no middle and exposed her naked midriff, Vernon ordered her to remove it and put on something else. When she put on too much makeup, Vernon sat down with her and helped her rub it off. And whenever he caught her doing anything he did not approve of, even in the area of her language, he corrected her mercilessly. It was his intention to become and continue to be a strict and constant presence in Oprah's life, just as strict and constant as the church to which they both belonged. Vernon Winfrey had long talks with his rebellious 14-year-old daughter. He asked Oprah once, "What kind of person do you want to be?" And before she could answer, he talked about the 3 different kinds of people there were: those who made things happen, those who watched things happen, and those who did not know what was happening. Oprah didn't like those last 2 kinds of people, he recalled. She did not realize it then, but the moment she returned to her father and stepmother was the most important one in her life, a major turning point. Not getting the attention from my mother made me seek it in other places, the wrong places, Oprah has said, until my father came and got me from my mother in Milwaukee and took me to Nashville where he lived. His discipline channeled my need for love and attention into a new direction. He had a way with him that got to her. He could whip her if he chose, the way his mother, her grandmother, had always done, but he usually chose not to. Instead, she recalled, all he did was stand there and look at her hard out of the corner of his eyes with his chin down low. As strict as he was about what she wore and how she talked, Vernon was stricter about her education. He viewed education and learning as the key to all success. I remember coming home one time with C's on my report card, Oprah said. My father sat down with me. He told her immediately, "This is not acceptable." Oprah was indignant. "What do you mean, unacceptable? A C is average. This is not a bad grade." Vernon answered simply enough. "If you were a child who could get only C's, then that is really all I would expect of you. I wouldn't demand any more from you than C's, but you are not. And so in this house, for you, C's are not acceptable." That was enough for Oprah. She was smart, and she was sensitive, and above all, she had pride in her intelligence. And so she did the one thing she could do. She changed her ways. Zelma pitched in too, as she had before when Oprah was much smaller, and now took her teenage daughter to the library every 2 weeks, whereas before Oprah had been required to read 1 book a week. She was now required to choose 5 books, read them, and write book reports about them every 2 weeks. From all this work on her studies, Oprah developed into an A student. She even won an award for oratory, another strong suit of hers. Reading and talking, those were her fortes. When she was 16, without the slightest fanfare, she was voted the most popular girl in her class at school. She also was urged to run for president of the high school student council. This was, of course, a problem for her. She was a minority among members of the majority. Her solution to that problem pointed to her future success in the world later on. She knew that the issue of integration was high in everyone's mind in 1970, and she felt she would be ganged up on by the whites if she made a point of her race. She chose not to call attention to the fact at all. When she announced her candidacy, her way to diffuse the issue of race was to make it a non-issue in the campaign. She organized cafeteria caucuses, urging voters to pick the best candidate. She even pledged better cafeteria food and improved school spirit, and touted a live band for the junior prom that year. She won. The year 1970, in retrospect, was quite a winning year for Oprah. Not only was she tops in politics with her new position as president of the Student Council, but she was selected to attend the White House Conference on Youth in Washington with a group of other students from Nashville. In the same year, she joined the high school drama club to hone her speaking voice and polish her stage presence. By now, she had a future in mind. She knew she would someday be an actress. She had all the talents that would help make her a superior stage personality: intelligence, a quick wit, a good memory, a sense of humor, an outgoing nature, and above all, imagination. And sure enough, it was in the very next year, 1971, that her big breakthrough came. However, it had to do with her superior abilities in the art of writing and of articulate speech, and not in her interest in drama. She tried out for a beauty contest to select Miss Fire Prevention for Nashville, Tennessee. Miss Fire Prevention? Did she look good in a red hat and a fire suit? "I know it's not a biggie," she admitted about the contest later, "but for me it was special. I was the only black, the first black, to win the darn thing." She won it because she had learned how to score high in the goofy question-and-answer sessions that always accompanied beauty contests of that kind. Those assets were always her magic key to success. On the morning of the interview with the judges, Oprah happened to tune into the Today Show on NBC TV, then starring Barbara Walters. When the judges asked her that afternoon what she wanted to do with her life, Oprah was just about to give her own well-thought-out answer, "I want to be a 4th-grade school teacher," when she remembered the excitement of seeing Barbara Walters interviewing people. "I believe in truth," she told the judges, "and I want to perpetuate truth, so I want to be a journalist." There were always questions in these contests. In the last round of this one, the key question involved what each contestant would do if she was suddenly to come into possession of $1 million. One contender answered the question by saying that if she had $1 million, she would buy her mother a refrigerator, her father a truck, and her brother a motorcycle. The second contender said that if she had $1 million, she would give it all away to the poor. When it came to Oprah's turn, she realized that she would be unable to top either of the other two contestants in paying tribute to altruism. She would have to attack the problem in another way. If I had $1 million, they waited. The answer would determine the winner. How could she top her two competitors? I'd be a spending fool. It was the sheer audacity and the humor of it that struck the judges. By simply stating the truth in an interesting and amusing way, she won the beauty contest. Oprah had been sponsored for the contest by radio station WVOL, a local black outlet. As a result of winning the role of Miss Fire Prevention, she was invited to drop by the station the next day to pick up her prizes. I was waiting in the lobby when a producer walked by. He recognized her and stopped to chat. One thing led to another, and finally he got interested in her. "Would you like to hear your voice on tape?" he asked her. Would I? You bet she would. The radio producer took her into the studio and handed her some wire copy to read. Oprah snuggled up to the microphone and started reading from the yellow sheets. The tape rolled, and her voice was on record. When she glanced up, the producer waved her on. By that time, she noticed that there were two other people standing with the producer. She continued. By the time she was through, there were 6 people, including the producer, standing there listening to her carefully. She handed back the wire copy and said, "Thanks." They rolled the tape and listened along with her. "You're a real good reader," said the producer. "And the mic loves your voice," said the engineer standing nearby. There was a brief consultation among the 6 bystanders. At the end of it, Oprah was asked if she would like to come down for a tryout. Maybe the station would be interested in hiring her on a part-time basis to read the news. She was agreeable and excited. When she tried out, she was given some harder stuff to do, but of course she had no fears at all about reading, and she won the job. Actually, the job was created for her. But she was working now, hired on the spot. It was the beginning of Oprah Winfrey on the air. Every afternoon she would rush away from high school, do the news at 3:30, 4, and every half hour until 8 at night. It was a marvelous life. In her senior year, there was another contest. This one was sponsored by the local Elks Club. Vernon talked his daughter into trying out for it. It was a beauty contest, but this one had a prize that was impressive. Whoever won would get a 4-year scholarship to Tennessee State University right there in Nashville. Needless to say, Oprah Winfrey won the contest hands down. College for Oprah Winfrey turned out, unfortunately, not to be precisely what the doctor ordered. In fact, unlike high school where she blossomed, college proved to be a distressing and non-productive period in her personal life. She was hardly just another first-year co-ed. It was in that first year that her expertise in beauty contests gained her another big win. This one pitted her against other black women for the title of Miss Black Tennessee. "I didn't expect to win," she said, "nor did anybody else expect me to. There were all these light-skinned girls, vanillas, and here I was, a fudge child, real dark-skinned, and Lord, were they upset, and I was upset for them." She won because she licked the competition where she was strongest, in personality. The poise, the confidence, the cool manner. She won the contest, but from that high, Oprah's college career was unfortunately a downer. She was much sought after by the young men of Nashville. After all, she was a good-looking woman with a smashing figure. At the time she won the Miss Tennessee beauty contest, she weighed only 135 pounds. She fell in love with a young man named William Taylor. Now a mortician in Nashville, he was the most interesting person in her young life. With her college career only beginning, and her relations with her college peers not yet established, and with her good looks a burden rather than an asset in this situation, She almost fell into the marriage trap. "I'd be married to a mortician and probably be teaching Sunday school in Nashville someplace," she would tell her teenage audiences later. "Lord, I wanted him." She wanted him, but he was an inveterate singles player. He did not really want her enough. A crisis came in their relationship, and he threatened to walk out on her. She threatened to jump out of a window into the street if he did not stay with her. Oprah was devastated when Taylor finally walked out on her, telling her that marriage to her simply was not in the cards. For days she wept bitterly. Recovering from this emotional trauma was not easy for Oprah. Her schoolwork suffered, and at the same time she found that her college career was turning completely sour. The decade of the 1960s had just ended, but the hopes raised in the black community by that stormy period of progress had not really come yet to full fruition. A sense of frustration was beginning to set in, a sense of outrage that the full equality promised by those revolutionary years was not being fully or even partially realized. Tennessee State University was an all-black college. It was still in the throes of the civil rights movement. Oprah was interested in dramatics and speech, both pursuits she felt could further her career in the theater, in radio, or on television. Frankly, she could not have cared less about politics, and yet her attitude caused problems, big problems, from the moment she walked on campus. "It was a weird time," she said later. "This whole Black Power movement was going on then, but I just never had any of those angry black feelings. I tried to do the hey brother bit, but it was a sham. Truth is, I've never felt prevented from doing anything because I was either black or a woman." Although she worked hard at it, she simply was unable to get up any tremendous enthusiasm about the burning issues of the day. She wanted to study drama, speech, English. How did the other blacks react to her apolitical attitude? They all hated me. No, they resented me. I refused to conform to the militant thinking of the time. Because of her apolitical bent, she was more or less isolated from her peers, and because of that, she did not really take as active a part in the collegiate social world around her as she might have had she been more politically oriented, more active. Instead, she parlayed her apolitical bent into a very good-paying job. There was a job opening at WTVF-TV in Nashville, the CBS television outlet there. Since she was already used to working on radio at WVOL, it seemed a natural thing that she should try out for the job. "I had no idea what to do," she said, "so I pretended to be Barbara Walters. It seemed she was my only mentor. I used to watch the Today Show, and I thought, I'll do what Barbara does. I would sit like Barbara, or like I imagined Barbara to sit, and I'd look down at the script and up at the camera because I thought that's what you do, how you act. You try to have as much eye contact as you can. At least it seemed that way from what I had seen Barbara do. Whatever she did it right. She impressed the station brass, and they hired her." Vernon Winfrey was not at all put out by the idea that his daughter was working while she was in college. In fact, he was stunned to learn that she was making as much money as she was. She was salaried at $15,000 a year, while still a college student. As for the problem of attending classes and holding down her job at the station, it simply never materialized. There was always ample time for her to do her college work and to handle the news after class hours. She later confessed that it took her a very long time to get some sense of herself on camera. She would study tapes of herself reading the news and try it different ways to get that self-conscious look off her face. Always, of course, she knew that she had gotten the job because of the big push in the country to hire minorities. "Sure, I was a token," she admitted later, "but I was one happy token." She was the first female and the first black newscaster in Nashville. Later, she was promoted to anchor the 6 o'clock news while she was still a senior in college. She graduated in 1976 and became a full-time news anchor at the CBS outlet. Still, in spite of her success, there were problems in her life. It was becoming difficult for Oprah to stay in Nashville. She knew that the answer to her future did not lie in Tennessee at all, but it was hard to get away from home. In the long run, it was the stricture of her home life that finally gave her the impetus to leave. The ironic situation was that Oprah Winfrey was earning a good 5-figure salary as anchorwoman on WTV-FTV Nashville, and yet at the same time her father had her on a strict midnight curfew. And with Vernon, strict was strict. That meant Oprah could not miss the midnight curfew, or else. She began looking around. She sent her tapes to Los Angeles and to Boston and to New York. She struck pay dirt in a most unexpected place. It was Baltimore, Maryland. Oprah Winfrey's move from Nashville's WTV-FTV to Baltimore's WJZ-TV was a big step in the general direction of big-time broadcasting. Baltimore was a much bigger city than Nashville. It was, in fact, the 10th largest city in the United States. Although Oprah had always wanted to make it big in a place like New York, who wouldn't? She was happy for the chance to prove herself in Baltimore. She was confident and feisty when she arrived at WJZ-TV, the city's ABC outlet, and anxious to show the people what a good newscaster she was. She would, she felt, out-Barbara Walters. To celebrate her independence from the strictures of Vernon Winfrey's authority, she made it a point to attend a staff party at the station almost on the day she arrived in town, and to underline her own degree of personal freedom and self-worth, she stayed up till dawn, waiting for that old magic that would transform her into her own woman, just like Cinderella in reverse. There was no magic. In fact, the way the job at WJZ-TV developed, it became obvious to Oprah that exactly the reverse of magic was about to befall her. Reading the news in Nashville somehow was not quite the same thing as reading the news and being a co-anchor in Baltimore. From the moment she was hired, she was scheduled to act as co-anchor for the 6 o'clock evening newscast. She was a promotable item, and the station began immediately to mount a public relations campaign, giving the city of Baltimore something to think and talk about. Billboards all around the city and environs soon sprouted up with the cute and somehow leading question, "What's an Oprah?" It did not amuse Oprah. From the beginning, she loathed the publicity angle of the cutesy pie, "what's it" phrase. There was another reason for the lack of magic. Oprah was paired off with a veteran newscaster named Jerry Turner on the evening show. It was, as one Baltimore Sun reporter, Luther Young, wrote in a story about the two co-anchors, a marriage which quickly failed. As she later said, referring to the relationship on camera between her and her male co-anchor, the chemistry left a lot to be desired, as indeed became apparent to others at the station and in the audience watching them. Nor was she particularly sanguine about her own talent at that point. When it was clear that she still had a few things to learn about broadcasting in general, something came apart inside her. No matter how hard she tried, she simply could not get herself to come over right. For one thing, she had never had much training in going out on a news story and digging around for details and bringing it back in a polished, finished manner. What was more crucial, she had never learned to adapt herself to the most salient point in journalism, distancing oneself from the story in such a manner that one can present it as something outside oneself. The problem was with Oprah Winfrey's persona. She really wanted to be an actress, a person whose job it was to show emotion and to live a story. She never really wanted to be outside things that were happening, an observer equipped with the cold-blooded objectivity necessary to tell what was really happening. "I really wasn't cut out for the news," she said later in a frank analysis of her co-anchor failure. "I'd have to fight back the tears if the story was too sad." One case in point was a dramatic story to which she was assigned. She was required to interview a woman after a fire had destroyed her home. When Oprah got to the scene of the fire, she found the woman grief-stricken, wandering about almost in a daze. When Oprah telephoned back to the station that the story was too sad for her to handle, her boss blew up. If she didn't bring back the story he told her, she would be fired. It was her job to get the story, no matter how sad it was. Oprah set herself to the task and began to question the woman. The victim had lost everything she had ever owned in the fire, she told Oprah, and worse was to come. She had lost 7 children in the blaze. All of them were dead. Oprah simply burst into tears on hearing this. When she brought the tape story into the station, she told her boss that it was too painful to show, but he rolled the tape and disagreed. Under direct orders, she went on the air with it, watched it as the tape played, and apologized to her viewers at the end for the way she had handled it, for being unable to do it objectively. Oprah could only be herself on the air. "So I recognized that I had a problem," she said later. "But I still remained a reporter. That's what I was hired to do." But in her opinion, not a very good one. For one thing, she did not like to read the news copy ahead of time to check for errors or words she might mispronounce. To her, there was a great deal to be said for a spontaneous experience, that is, getting the news when everybody else got it. As a result of that, names were occasionally butchered, or grammar or diction fell by the wayside. Eventually, even the station began to recognize the seriousness of Oprah's weaknesses and began to agree with her own estimate of herself, one she had felt instinctively from the beginning. They could see it for themselves now as they watched her on-air performance. The brass began to fret about Oprah. She had a solid contract with the station, and it was in 6 figures. It had to be honored. What to do with her? It was obvious she was not right as a 6 o'clock anchor. On April 1st, 1977, April Fool's Day, they called her in, and Oprah got the word that she was going to be removed from the anchor spot. It was a demotion, of course, something bad for the ego as well. The station was adamant. It would have to figure out something else for her to do. Because she did not fit into the role for which she had been hired, the station finally came up with a strategy. The problem, the brass felt, was that Oprah didn't fit the slot, not that the slot was the wrong one to try to fit her into in the first place. Thus, the obvious thing to do was to change Oprah. It was the assistant news director who gave it to her with both barrels one morning. He sat her down opposite his desk and stared at her a long moment before coming out with it. "Your hair is too thick," he told her. "Your eyes are too far apart. Your nose is too wide. Your chin is too long. You have to do something about it." She was devastated. She sat there in an absolute funk. After all, she had won beauty contests. It wasn't as if she was some kind of plug ugly. Beside that, the station had seen what they were getting when they hired her. Why didn't they hire a woman with thin hair, with narrow eyes, with a needle nose, with a receding chin? "What am I supposed to do about it?" she asked from the depths of her shattered ego. "We're going to send you to New York to an exclusive and expensive beauty salon. Not everyone is as lucky as you." And so Oprah, trying to rejuvenate her shot-down ego, traveled to Manhattan and entered the salon of a makeup artist who fooled around with her face for a while, gave her some eyeliner and eyeshadow, and a lot of tips on how to make herself look not like an Oprah, but like something else fashionable. The next step was a hair salon. After all, the dictum was that her hair was too thick. They were obviously going to thin it. Trying to remain calm, Oprah sat there while they studied her. "I ended up in this one place," she said later. "They did shishi-poo-poo makeovers. They gave me a French perm. A French perm and Negro hair don't mix." Her hair was too thick for the usual chemicals, and of course the experts had to decide what to substitute for them. Eventually they came to a conclusion, and Oprah went on the table. From the beginning, the operation was uncomfortable. "I felt the lotion burning my skull," she said. "I kept telling them, 'Excuse me, this is beginning to burn a little.' Hell, it wasn't burning, it was flaming." When she came out from under the dryer, she thought it looked awful. But the Shishi operators were ecstatic. "It's beautiful." She went back to Baltimore. Something dramatic began to happen. Her hair started to loosen from her skull. It was actually thinning out. "In a week," Oprah reported, "I was bald as the great American eagle. I had to walk around wearing scarves for months. All my self-esteem was gone, my whole self-image. It was horrible. I cried constantly." Gradually, her hair came back in, but her ego took a long time recovering from that fiasco. Back at the station, the program directors were still trying to devise something for Oprah to do. Now the brass decided to try to rejuvenate the image of Oprah as a communicator by giving her a short stint with a speech coach in New York to make her a viable communicant in Baltimore broadcasting. Oprah went into this misadventure with grim determination to make success of it, and the project started out very well. The coach found immediately that she had a bright and talented woman on her hands, not some dull beauty of a Barbie doll. The voice coach rightly reasoned that there was something else besides verbal diction that was not quite right at the station, and that the root of the problem Oprah was facing might lie somewhere other than in her speech. The voice improvement lesson altered course shortly after they began, becoming something quite different. The program turned into a kind of psyching up of the persona project. The voice coach rightly concluded that Oprah was not standing up for herself with enough determination to override the decisions being made by her employers, most of them the wrong ones. "You'll never make it in broadcasting unless you toughen up," she told Oprah. "You can't let them push you around like this." The speech therapist finally graduated her back to the television moguls who were paying her bills, announcing that the therapy was concluded. Oprah was slated to co-host a short local fill-in show in the morning called People Are Talking. Would she be any better at talking than at reading? It did not seem so to anyone in the know, but they would certainly try it. After all, something had to be done. People Are Talking was a kind of low-key early-morning talk show, slotted in as a continuation of the very successful network show on ABC TV called Good Morning America. Oprah went into it without any of her usual confidence or feeling of certain success. In fact, she was almost humble when she showed up for the job. After all, she could well be seeing the end of her television career, such as it was. She knew how important this opportunity was going to be. And oddly enough, for some reason, everything began to come together for Oprah Winfrey. The show worked. "I did this talk show," Oprah said. "I think I was interviewing some of the cast from All My Children and maybe the Carvel Ice Cream Man. Really big-time stuff, you know. But I'm telling you, I finished that show, and the minute it was over, I thought, thank God, this is it. I found out what I was meant to do. This is what I was born for. This is like breathing." From the start, she worked well with her co-host, Richard Scher. There was a kind of outrageousness that surfaced in her now and then on the air, and that outrageousness gave the show its flavor. "I never considered myself funny," Oprah admitted. "Richard was always the funny one. I was always the straight man." There was something in her manner and her instincts that seemed to dream up the right questions to ask, and come up with these questions while in conversation with the interviewee. Producer Sherry Burns remembered the questions were not written out in advance for Oprah. She asks the questions that people want to ask, really want to ask. That was the key to her success in Baltimore. Even the television brass at WJZ-TV came to realize what they had when they switched Oprah from news to talk. Alan Frank, then one of the program executives at WJZ-TV, admitted, "Oprah has a personality that's big and real and her own, and that comes right through the screen. She's very natural, and people see that, and they like it." While her professional life was on the upgrade, her personal life was definitely on the downgrade. The trouble, as it usually was with the men in her life, with Oprah's relationships with the opposite sex. Part of Oprah's problem with men stemmed from the fact that she did not believe in living with a man unless she was married to him. Although she's never wanted to discuss the details of the situation that gave her the most disturbing emotional problems of her life, she has spoken about Baltimore. I'd had a relationship with a man for 4 years. I wasn't living with him. I've never lived with anyone. And I thought I was worthless without him. Apparently, this man continued to play the cat-and-mouse game with her, coming on to her, then running off, then outright spurning her. The more he rejected me, Oprah admitted, the more I wanted him. I felt depleted, powerless. Her lover provoked a knockdown, drag-out fight, probably with calculated deliberation. At the end of it, Oprah was stunned and unbelieving when he told her in no uncertain terms that he was through with her forever. What she did next humiliates her to this day. I have been down on the floor on my knees groveling, she says. She remembers pleading with him, with this person who had done the best he could to ruin her life forever. Oh God, she says, why do we do this to ourselves? At first she thought he was simply threatening her, as he had done before. She thought he would be back, all forgiving and friendly once again. But as the days passed into weeks, she realized in her depressed state that he would not be back, ever. There's nothing worse than rejection, she said. Professionally, she was doing well. Personally, her life was hell. I was so adamant about being my own person that I wouldn't go for counseling, she recalled. Then it came to me. I realized there was no difference between me and an abused woman who has to go to a shelter, except that I could stay home. It was emotional abuse, which happens to women who stay in relationships that do not allow them to be all that they can be. You're not getting knocked around physically, but in terms of your ability to soar, your wings are clipped. Women have that common bond when it comes to giving up power. I speak to a lot of women now, trying to get them to understand that each of us is responsible for herself. You can read that in books, but it isn't until you come to a spiritual understanding of who you are, not necessarily a religious feeling, but deep down the spirit within, that you begin to take control. The key fact she discovered in her soul-searching was that she had made a big mistake in dealing with this one man. I had given this man the power over my life, and I will never give up my power to another person. Getting out of that relationship was a major turning point, and the other turning point was realizing that getting out was a turning point, she said. Oprah Winfrey was coming to terms with herself in more ways than one in Baltimore. As she continued to find herself in a day-to-day fashion while she was performing on People Are Talking, she was coincidentally refashioning herself into the real Oprah Winfrey, the one who never before had existed. In discovering others and what made them tick, Oprah was discovering things about herself, things that she had never before been aware of. The format of the talk show had evolved into a much more complex and evocative form during the decades of the 60s and 70s. By the time Oprah was demoted to the Baltimore talk show People Are Talking, Phil Donahue had stepped down into the audience to bring each member of it into the magical aura of direct communication. This suited Oprah Winfrey fine. She had always been a hands-on person. She loved to talk directly to people on a friendly, communicating basis. And as she blossomed in the talk show format in Baltimore, she became even more a communicator and lightning rod for the television audience out there watching their sets. Mostly she shone because she could communicate with another person one-on-one, at the same time communicating in a larger sense with the entire audience watching out there. Vulnerability became one of her key character elements. It was through her own special vulnerability, through her own sensitivity about people and things, that the viewing audience came to experience the lives and stories of the people with whom Oprah chatted. Her strength was always her ability to wade right in, take charge of a conversation, and shape it as it came out, supercharge it with her own energy, and wing it. She began to shape her shows more deliberately. She knew that her interviews struck more sparks when she took on someone who was slightly controversial. Helping Oprah on the People Are Talking show was a staff of resourceful and energetic people. One of them had become a fast friend of Oprah's. Deborah DeMayo was the associate producer of the show. DeMayo worked with the producer, Sherry Burns, and several others to dream up ideas for the interviews Oprah had and to go out and get interesting people for her to strike sparks off of. Debbie DeMayo was feeling restless. She began hunting around for a job where she could be a full producer rather than just an associate. She knew the value of the Oprah Winfrey interviews she had set up, and tapes of these went immediately into her portfolio. She began knocking on doors in New York, Los Angeles, and even Chicago, the home of the talk show giant, Phil Donahue. The revolving doors in the television business were moving even as she was being interviewed. In Chicago, WLS-TV, the ABC TV affiliate, lost a co-producer on a morning talk show titled AM Chicago. Dennis Swanson, the station's general manager, began a hasty search for a replacement and interviewed Debbie DeMayo. He noticed Oprah Winfrey and her freewheeling guest spots among the producer's tapes. He saw what kind of a person she was, certainly dynamic, in his own words. He decided he would like to meet her sometime. Debbie was lucky. She got the job on WLS-TV and gave her notice to WJZ-TV in Baltimore. Then she said her tearful goodbyes to her associates there, including Oprah, and packed up to leave for Chicago. Even before she began her new job, Rob Weller, the host of the show she had been hired to co-produce, suddenly was tapped for the big time and gave his notice to Swanson. Weller was headed for New York. Swanson was forced to begin a new talent hunt, this time for a host for the show. The station manager had not forgotten Oprah Winfrey, nor had Debbie DeMayo. Swanson borrowed her tapes and once again studied her work. In a few weeks, he had her in for an interview. There were other hosts and hostesses he saw, all of them good, but none really had the fire and the temperament that Oprah Winfrey had. Swanson wondered if he might be able to pit Winfrey against Donahue and come out a winner in Chicago. It was a long shot, but just maybe. And so Swanson did take the chance. He telephoned her and, with his fingers crossed, gave her the good news that the station had decided to hire her for AM Chicago. Oprah Winfrey packed up her bags, said goodbye to 6 years of fun and frustration, and headed for Chicago. From that moment on, she never looked back. She arrived in Chicago not at all like the all-conquering heroine, but simply like herself, brassy, somewhat sassy, and at the same time vulnerable in that peculiarly aggressive Oprah Winfrey way. Like any wise employee, she took a good, long, appraising look at the show that she was going to hostess before she strode into the studio to take it over, if indeed that was the way she would decide to play it. But she was thankful that General Manager Dennis Swanson had given her almost carte blanche to do what she would with the third-place, somewhat ailing AM Chicago. What struck Oprah as she studied the past reviews of the show was that the plan had apparently been to stay out of the way of the Phil Donahue juggernaut. The show had the same time slot, 9 a.m., on another network. Nobody wanted to be in the rowboat when it was sliced in two by the ocean liner. Whether that was what really obsessed the talk show hosts in the morning or not, Oprah vowed not to cower in the shadow of Donahue. And the lady from Baltimore had a good idea about that audience out there watching. It was exactly the way Phil Donahue's was, predominantly the white housewife. She knew that though she herself could never be a housewife, they still considered her one of them, skin color notwithstanding. The truth was, of course, otherwise. I'm not one of them, I say to them. I could not do what you do. I can't bake a roast. I have not been in a grocery store for 2 years. But what she knew she had in common with her housewife viewers was a belief system we all share in. I'm really no different from all those women who are watching because I want the same things for my life that they want. I want to be happy, a sense of fulfillment, children who love me, respect from my husband. Her gift, as she put it then, was in simply being able to schmooze. Schmooze is a Yiddish word that means to indulge in small talk, chit-chat, the exchange of inconsequential intimacies. The odds against her were formidable. During her stint in Baltimore, Oprah had gained a great deal of weight, a result of worrying about her job and how she was doing it. And by the time she made the move to Chicago, she weighed about 180 pounds. Everybody kept telling me that it was going to be impossible to succeed because I was going into Phil Donahue's hometown, so I'd eat and eat. I'd eat out of the nervousness of it all. Television is a funny medium. It actually enlarges people, particularly those who are big to begin with. With Oprah, it put pounds on the pounds she already had. But even if she seemed to dominate the picture tube and came right out into the room with the viewer, she didn't do badly at all. She loved to talk, to schmooze. And that was what she did at 9 o'clock every morning in Chicago. The carefully developed down-home style that she had fabricated in her years in Baltimore and Nashville was somewhat of a surprise to native Chicagoans at first, but quite soon they got used to it. Within a few weeks, she was, surprise, outdistancing the most famous television celebrity in town, Phil Donahue, and on his own turf. 6 weeks after she had begun doing AM Chicago, the Nielsen's showed her ahead of her competition. And for some reason, the critics liked her as much as the viewers did, a phenomenon not always enjoyed by popular personalities. She might not have been good at reading the news and anchoring the hard stuff, but she was tops at the art of conversation. Oprah has this honesty with her audience and her guests that comes through, said Joe Ahern, the station manager. No matter who you talk to, black, white, rich, poor, male, female, fat, thin, they say, she's just like me. Identification, that was the key. Her intuition was a formidable element of her personality, especially in understanding exactly what kind of guests would pull in the most viewers, and she handled those guests like a consummate pro, getting the best out of each of them without any advanced study. Her own producer, Debbie DeMeo, said, "She's 100% the same off-camera as on. People like her because they can relate to her. She's got all the same problems, overweight, boyfriend troubles, she's been poor. So when people see her on television, they can say, 'That's my friend, Oprah.'" She broke into the national big time in December 1984 when Newsweek ran a page-long article on her. "About all that's missing for Chicago's hottest media star," the piece said, "is a national stage. But considering the city's extraordinary track record for helping launch network glitterati, many in the industry believe that her ascent remains only a matter of time." The prophecy was absolutely on the nose. In January 1985, the Donahue show quite suddenly pulled up stakes, folded its tent, and took off for New York City. Of course, the real reason was that Donahue and his second wife, actress-producer Marlo Thomas, wanted to spend more time together. She was appearing on Broadway, and Donahue was working out of Chicago. Their erratic schedule was interfering with their marriage. Once Donahue had left his home turf, Oprah's possession of it increased in astronomical proportions, and she became more and more daring in her selection of guests. On New Year's Day 1985, she was sassy enough to book female members of the Ku Klux Klan for her show. The women appeared dressed in big white sheets and cone hats, just like their male counterparts. In the discussion that followed, interspersed with Oprah's acidulous comments, they maintained that it was stated in the Bible that the races of the world should be separate. Oprah, with a gleam in her eye, invited them all to lunch with her. They declined. Most of the audience was indignant at what they considered to be a slap in the face. "I would have slapped them," one woman told Oprah. Oprah shook her head and addressed the audience. "What you must understand is that when the show is over, those people are still going to be Klan girls, and I'm still going to be Oprah. You can only hope to expose racism for what it is." By the time 1985 was underway, it was obvious that Oprah had hit her stride and simply could not be stopped. She began to assume even more control over production of the show than she had done previously. She became an avid reader of newspapers, magazines, and books. She wanted to know what was going on all over the world, everything that might become grist for the mill of her show. Early in 1985, Oprah Winfrey went national when she appeared on somebody else's show. She was invited by Joan Rivers, who was substituting for Johnny Carson, to be a guest on The Tonight Show. Rivers had heard about Oprah's popularity in Chicago and wanted to see if it was justified. The upshot of the visit was very good press for Oprah and a publicized duel between Rivers and Oprah to see who could lose weight more successfully. Oprah said she would lose 30 pounds if Joan Rivers would lose 5. As Joan put it, "You're a pretty girl and single, lose it," to which Oprah responded, "I'll lose it if you'll lose it." In 1985, Quincy Jones was a very busy man. A record producer, among singing stars he had guided to substantial success were such luminaries as Michael Jackson and Frank Sinatra. Jones was moving into the motion picture business. Among the current properties he had on hold was the Alice Walker novel The Color Purple, a story in letter form about blacks growing up in the South. Meanwhile, Jones was involved in a lawsuit against Michael Jackson. There was a trial going on in Chicago, and Jones had been called to testify in court. A busy man, he had arranged a 6-hour appearance and booked a hotel room for a quick in and then a quick out. Eating breakfast in his room, Jones switched the television on and glanced at it desultorily as he munched his toast and drank his coffee. As he glanced at the television screen, he became aware of a peculiar phenomenon. He was watching someone who could have stepped right out of the pages of Alice Walker's book. He was gazing at Sophia. This Sophia was working a program called A.M. Chicago. He continued to watch her, fascinated. She had the strength of Sophia and the brass, and she was a powerful personality on the air. Minutes after the show had finished, he had her name and was on the telephone to California. There he was connected with Reuben Cannon and Associates, which was handling casting for the upcoming picture. Meanwhile, Oprah Winfrey was blissfully unaware of the wheels within wheels that were beginning to turn for her. She had read the book The Color Purple when it was first published. She was so pleased with it that she handed out copies to all her friends. The character who interested her the most was Sophia, a woman who was spirited and strong and who refused to let her spirit be broken, first by an abusive husband and finally by prison authorities. She stood for what Oprah stood for herself, the indomitable spirit of the human being. 1 week after Jones had spotted Oprah in Chicago, the Reuben Cannon people contacted her officially and Oprah was on her way to the West Coast to make a screen test for the role of Sophia. Steven Spielberg called her into the office after the tests had been made and run off on the screen. He told her the truth. She was ideal for the role of Sophia, but they would have to test other people for the part. After all, she was not an experienced actress. And so she had to wait for the decision to be made. But meanwhile, Oprah was involved in her duel with Joan Rivers. She found herself eating too heavily and checked into a health farm to take off the pounds. It was while she was there, trying to lose weight without going crazy, that casting director Reuben Cannon telephoned her. When he gave her the good news that she would play Sophia, she cheered and cheered. She would be svelte for Joan Rivers, and she would also be playing Sophia. "What are you doing at that health farm?" Cannon asked her after a short pause. "Losing weight. I'm on a diet. I just lost 30 pounds. Congratulate me." Cannon snorted. "You're playing Sophia. You can't lose weight. Whatever you've lost, you'd better go out and find it again." And that day, she said, the day she was told she had won the role of Sophia in the picture, was the single happiest day of my life. She felt blessed. Quincy Jones became my #1 favorite person in the universe. The film was made during 8 weeks of location work in South Carolina and in Hollywood for the looping and cutting. Oprah went into the job with her usual self-confidence, but actually she understood her shortcomings and her problems. She had never done anything like this before. She knew she was not a professional actress. She thought, what if I do my best and it's just not good enough? And so she worked hard. Everybody was a joy to work with, Oprah said of the film company later. We were a family. Her associates back in Chicago were very supportive of Oprah when she was in the Deep South on the film. They sent her weekly care packages and even went down in groups to visit her. Oprah needed a role model, in the sense of someone she could pretend to be while she played Sophia. Finally, Oprah hit on the proper person. It was Fannie Lou Hamer, a rural Mississippi civil rights leader in the 1960s. Oprah had read a great deal about her and had been struck by the woman's forbearance in the face of brutalization and years spent in jail in the fight for civil rights. So I had Fannie Lou Hamer in the back of my head, Oprah said. Soon it was all over, and she was back in Chicago, doing her show under much less strain and torment. By the time she had finished filming, she had no idea at all if she had done a good job or a bad job in the part. She waited for the film to come out to find out. It was premiered in December 1985, and she was accompanied by her staff to New York. It was an instant hit, but the reviews weren't all that tremendously impressive. In its subhead, Variety noted, "Overproduced, overly manipulative Steven Spielberg drama is saved by outstanding performances." Nevertheless, Oprah Winfrey came out very well. Among the standouts, Variety listed Oprah Winfrey's burly Sophia. Other reviewers also selected Oprah among the peaks of a film that had both peaks and valleys. David Anson of Newsweek wrote, "Far flashier than Whoopi Goldberg's Celie is Oprah Winfrey's role as Sophia. As played by Winfrey, the Chicago talk show host, she's a brazen delight." In spite of the acceptance of the picture by many theatergoers, the film began to draw a number of negative responses, particularly from the black community. Willis Edward, president of the Beverly Hills chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, argued in an interview that the movie never showed the good about black men. "This is not a black film," Oprah retorted at a special preview of the picture in Washington, D.C. "It's about endurance, survival, faith, and ultimate triumph." Every time there is a play or movie with white people in it, Oprah noted, they don't expect them to represent the history or culture of the race. We aren't trying to depict the history of black people. It's one woman's story, that's all. With all the controversy, however, the movie did very well in its first 7 weeks, grossing $39.2 million. It was also hailed by many critics as one of the 10 best films of the year. Then came the coup de grace. In February, when the Academy Awards were announced for films produced in 1985, The Color Purple was one of the most celebrated of the films mentioned, with 11 citations in all. It was nominated for Best Picture. Whoopi Goldberg was nominated for Best Actress, and Margaret Avery and Oprah Winfrey were also nominated for Best Supporting Actress. This was no small honor to Oprah. For her first movie role to be nominated for an Oscar, unbelievable. And then came the news. Oprah did not win. In fact, the entire slate of the picture was almost totally ignored. I could not go through the night pretending that it was okay that Color Purple did not win an Oscar, she said. I was stunned. It was the worst night of my life. In the typically mindless way that things happen in the entertainment business, Oprah Winfrey was scheduled to shoot her scenes for her second motion picture the day after she was up for an Oscar and lost out for her first role. The new picture was a film version of Richard Wright's classic novel Native Son. For the movie, Oprah had been cast as the mother of the hero, Bigger Thomas. She was a newcomer among a group of well-known actors and actresses, not the amateur of The Color Purple. The story is set in the Chicago of the 1940s. Bigger Thomas is a tortured young black man whose rage and frustration in the face of the virulent racism all about him drives him to express himself in the only way he feels he can, by the murder of a rich young white girl. As Bigger's mother, Oprah played what she called a very worn and tired 36-year-old woman. It's a part where I had to be burdened, troubled, weak, and I wanted to be that person. Yet it was difficult work for Oprah, and because of the irony of the Oscar loss, it was the letdown, post-depression or something. In an interview later, she warned Regis Philbin and his viewers, "It's a very small role. Do not park your car if you intend to see me in this movie." The motion picture opened to less than deafening accolades in December 1986. It was pulled shortly after opening. This one failure did not put a total damper on Oprah's movie career. She was anxious to continue. When Oprah returned to Chicago from shooting Native Son in April 1986, she had become what is usually considered a household word in America. Once back on the job, she found that she was pulling even more viewers than she had previously attracted. She did some very serious shows. One elderly black man was reduced to weeping on her show as he described a lynching in the Deep South to which he had been a witness. Another woman burst into tears as she described the years of incest forced on her by her father. It was, incidentally, on that very show that Oprah Winfrey revealed that she, as a child, had been the victim of sexual abuse by her cousin and by her uncle and by others as well. It was something, she recalled. The phones lit up with calls from women all over the country saying the same thing had happened to them as girls. As she gained firmer control of the direction of her show and of herself, Oprah came to realize what it was that made her show a very special thing. I don't really have a big-name guest kind of talk show. I'm more interested in people who have overcome some personal tragedy or who have something to offer in terms of spiritual or emotional development. People out there think that I'm their girlfriend. They treat me like that. It's really amazing. I think that happens because I feel that there's a common bond we all share. Oprah's success was tied directly to the success of AM Chicago, the show that had launched her. And as Oprah's image increased in clout and intensity in astronomical proportions, so did the size and majesty of the show. In August 1984, the show had been expanded to an hour. In September 1985, the brass at WLS-TV decided that Oprah had made it into something very special in her own image. The show's title was changed from AM Chicago to The Oprah Winfrey Show. As early as 1985, a national syndicator had become interested in the show as a property and in Oprah as a client. One of the most successful syndication operations in the country, King World, had built the game show Wheel of Fortune into a huge moneymaker for Merv Griffin, who owned it. And so it was that Stuart Hirsch, Chief Operating Officer of King World Productions Incorporated, began talks with Oprah and WLS-TV early on about syndicating the show. Syndicating the show meant selling it over the counter to independent stations. By October 1985, the show was on the block for any station, independent or network, to purchase. The target date for syndication was set for September 1986. Soon she had signed up with 180-odd stations. That was a bit less than Donahue's 200-plus, but within easy range. On its front page on December 31st, 1986, Variety headlined Oprah's success. Winfrey's Whammo Cindy Deal, with a subhead reading, "Show grosses $125 million, she gets $30 million. Oprah would be in a position to pocket more than $31 million in 1987-88, making her the highest-paid performer in show business. In addition to that, she had signed a 5-year contract with King World to host the series through the 1990-91 season. From the beginning, it was obvious that Oprah Winfrey possessed something quite out of the ordinary in the way of personality, outlook, and overall persona. When she spoke, people listened. When the Ku Klux Klan wives turned down her invitation to lunch, she responded with an unbelieving comment, "Even if I paid for it?" In time, her remarks came to be known as Oprah-isms. In a promotional piece for an upcoming show on self-made millionaires, Oprah confessed that her love life was sagging and needed a bit of bolstering up, preferably by somebody like a self-made millionaire. "If there is a 6'2" black man who fits this category, please, please come in." One of the subjects that is never far from the surface in Oprah Winfrey's life is the subject of black-white relations. There are those who say that Oprah Winfrey on her show is playing the typical mammy role, the Aunt Jemima thing, to suit the whites in the audience. To this, Oprah has responded, "I hear this a lot. I hear that I don't hug the black people the way I hug the white people, that I go to the white people in the audience first. First of all, there are more white people. There just are more. I could not survive with this show if I only catered to black people. I wouldn't be where I am if I did. That's not what it's about." About her blackness, Oprah frequently becomes quite vociferous. "There are still a lot of black people who are very angry and bitter. They want me to be just as angry and bitter, and I won't be. Some black people say I'm not black enough. I wonder, how black do you have to be?" About color consciousness, she says, "It doesn't matter to me what color people are. I try to see their souls first." The letters pour into Oprah Winfrey every day, at least 100 every 24 hours, and they prove one thing to her. Every one is more personal than the next. I mean, all of them are just incredibly, "you're the last person I have to turn to" kind of letters. And yes, I suppose it's a responsibility if you look at it that way, but we just look at it as another adjunct to the show. We don't do a show without offering help to people. When people write nasty letters to Oprah, they are frequently shocked to be invited to lunch with her. She now has a monthly luncheon she spends with people who hate her. "I started a monthly luncheon club for my hate viewers. I read all the mail and pick out 12 of the most hostile witches, and I take them to lunch. The first time, I spent 4 hours talking to them. We drank 14 bottles of champagne." February 1987 was time for the television sweeps. Because of the importance of the specific weeks involved in the sweeps, so-called because each rating service sweeps across all possible stations to determine the number of viewers watching each individual program, most shows try to put their best foot forward. Best foot, best face, best whatever. As long ago as March 1986, Phil Donahue had been planning one of the most spectacular miniseries of talk show programs yet on record. He and his people had been working for months, indeed years, in an attempt to repeat his hugely successful Space Bridge broadcast of 1986. Space Bridge is satellite lingo. Donahue had initiated 2 so-called citizens' summits, conversations between people in Russia and America, between studio audiences in the Soviet Union and the United States. Each program was co-moderated by Donahue and a Soviet journalist named Vladimir Pozner. Telecast both in the Soviet Union and the United States, this space bridge was so much talked about that Donahue determined to repeat the concept, but with one vital difference. What Donahue dreamed of was to go to Russia and do the show there, then bring it back and broadcast it in the States. In January 1987, all the red tape was cut away, and Donahue and his crew were flying over to Russia to make appearances in the Soviet Union over a period of 10 whole days. Word was out. During the first key week of the February sweeps, Donahue would feature 5 segments of his talk show subtitled Donahue in Russia. In the Oprah Winfrey camp, there was some consternation about what to do to counter this onslaught of ratings-rousing programming. There were, of course, 2 possibilities in moving to counterattack. Oprah could opt out for the period and simply do her own thing, as if Donahue's Russian invasion did not exist. Or she could try to mount some kind of spectacular ploy against Donahue, go for the jugular, so to speak. Largely to focus media attention on the official commemoration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday on January 19th, a group of civil rights demonstrators had decided to make an issue of Forsyth County, Georgia. Unknown to most people in the country, Forsyth County is lily white in its sociological structure. That is, there are no blacks or other minorities living within its geographical boundaries. The plan for the civil rights demonstrators, led by the Reverend Hosea L. Williams, was to focus media attention on this stronghold of Ku Klux Klanism and other types of racism right here in Forsyth County. Reporters, photographers, cameramen, and broadcasters appeared in some strength to watch the civil rights demonstration held on January 17, 1987, in Cumming, Georgia. The members of several local racist groups, including members of the Ku Klux Klan, immediately announced a counter-demonstration. These counter-demonstrators would appear opposite the demonstrators to give the incursion into Forsyth County what they deemed to be the proper balance. By the time the civil rights group had formed, the counter-demonstrators were well in position, waving signs and shouting racist slogans. They held aloft Confederate flags. The signs read in part, "White civil rights, go home nigger." The civil rights demonstrators sang songs, "We Shall Overcome," among others. Pretty soon, what had been expected all along occurred. There was a spate of rock throwing. Then it faded out and all the people went home. The feature made the news in many cities, but once the shouting and the fist-shaking and the flag-waving was over, it was all laid to rest. For exactly how long? 7 days. Exactly 1 week later, on January 24th, the Reverend Hosea Williams reappeared in Cumming, Georgia, this time with an expanded group of civil rights demonstrators. At this point, the group numbered some 20,000. Now the counter-demonstrators were augmented to a similar degree by shouting and ranting men and women and children. During this second encounter, the confrontation was so unruly that the local police force arrested 60 of the most vociferous and active counter-demonstrators. The second confrontation, as might be expected, drew a greater degree of attention from the various media. Moderate people in Forsyth County immediately protested the tone of the news coverage. Many were unhappy that only the racists were shown. There were people in Forsyth County who had participated on the side of the civil rights groups, but this fact had gone unnoticed by the press. 2 weeks before the television sweeps commenced, this second Cumming story hit the media. It gave Oprah and the Oprah Winfrey Show food for thought. Would Oprah find it profitable to call in the leaders of the Civil Rights March and the leaders of the counter-demonstration in Cumming and let them confront one another? Oprah was agreeable at first. She discussed the show with her producer, director, crew. Then they all began thinking, what if instead of flying the protagonists into the Chicago studio, the show itself flew down to Georgia and broadcast the incursion of a black celebrity, Oprah Winfrey, right at the scene of the demonstrations? Then Oprah would have first-hand knowledge of the place and of its people. The camera would show all there was to see. Everybody would have a chance to defend his or her position. Half black, half white. That was the proposed scenario at first. But that would mean getting the blacks into the county with the least trouble possible. Having both sides equally represented in Cumming itself would create a terribly volatile and dangerous situation. Then the idea of a conversation surfaced. The theme of the show would be not a confrontation, but an attempt to understand. The audience would be limited to members of Forsyth County. They would simply tell their story to Oprah, both sides of it. Thus, the show itself would provide an attempt at understanding the feelings and motivations of the people of all-white Forsyth County and to learn why this community had not allowed black people to live in it since 1912. Oprah was getting good play in the press. She was creating built-in interest in the Monday show, which would go up against the first day of Donahue's fantastically ratings-rich Russian visit. When the show began that Monday in Cumming's Dinner Deck restaurant, with residents of Forsyth County present in the audience, the Reverend Hosea Williams appeared outside in the street, protesting the fact that there were no blacks in the audience to present the civil rights side of the question. Despite learning of his presence outside at the beginning of the show, Oprah told the audience, "We are here simply to ask why Forsyth County has not allowed black people to live here in 75 years. Even with the audience limited to people who lived in Forsyth County, it was not the easiest group in the world to handle. When Oprah set the tone of the show by asking the question, the story slowly came out, told by members of the audience. In the year 1912, a white woman named Mary Crow was said to have been raped by 3 black men. On September 8, 1912, the 3 were lynched. On September 23rd, the word went out that all blacks would be out of the county. From that point on, there had simply been no blacks welcomed in Forsyth County. "They have the right to live wherever they want to," one woman in the audience said. "But we have a right to have a white community, too." This was too much for Oprah. "I like the way you speak of them. It's like you know black people come from Mars or something." The most vociferous racist in the group was Frank Shirley, a member of the committee to keep Forsyth County white. He said that most of the civil rights marchers who had come into Cumming for the demonstrations in January were communists and homosexuals. He said that many members of the demonstration were dupes of the communists. He had even seen 2 plane loads of guys from San Francisco fly into town. The implication was obvious. Most of the members of the audience were not quite so afflicted with tunnel vision. They were unhappy over the media treatment of their community. "There are people who would throw rocks," one woman admitted, "but the majority of our people are not like that at all." Still another woman said that she had marched with the civil rights people. "I felt it was important for Forsyth Countyans to be there and to make it clear that we welcome all law-abiding people in our community." It made for exciting television. Los Angeles Times columnist Howard Rosenberg, who reviewed the show later, called it one of the best talk shows he had seen in some time. "Winfrey was a one-woman ambassador," he wrote. "Surely the most curious Southern belle many whites inside the restaurant had ever seen. TV talk shows can't really destroy prejudice, but in this hour at least, the good guys got the last word." The show had everything: spontaneity, drama, conflict, tension, peril, anger, and honesty. Emotions were high and raw. Forsyth County's record of barring black residents is no fantasy, yet the vast majority in the room preached racial harmony, and only a minority, only a handful of Klan, Nazis, and other white supremacists present, spread hatred. The show was Great TV and Great Oprah. It was that show that set the proper tone for Oprah's success over the week-long haul. According to the Nielsen ratings for the week, Oprah rang in at 11.0, with Donahue at 7.1. It was a clear-cut victory for Oprah. In Parade magazine recently, Lloyd Shearer questioned the exact size of Oprah Winfrey's personal fortune. He disputed several statements quoted from King World about the amount of money she would make in 1987, and questioned the fact that she had been paid, as was said, $1 million for each of her acting jobs. Although claiming that estimates of her fortune are highly exaggerated, he wound up with a sudden about-face admission that, after all, what she did have and would get was considerable. Not bad, as he wrote, for a girl who was born into rural poverty in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. A case appraising with faint damnation. To echo Shearer's admission, no, not bad at all. Copyright 1987, Dove Books on Tape, Incorporated.